Tonight, breaking news. NBC News first to report President Biden set to announce his re-election as early as next week. Three sources confirming to our team that the president will announce a run for a second term, possibly as early as next Tuesday, April 25th. That would be the same day his campaign launched for 2020. Tonight, Kristen Welker, who helped break this story, on how his advisors are preparing for the launch and what the president's case will be for re-election. Plus, what he's up against, running for office at the age of 80. Also, charges dropped against Alec Baldwin for the deadly shooting on the set of Rust. His lawyers confirming the news on the same day the film resumed filming in Montana. And 2.5 months after New Mexico prosecutors filed involuntary manslaughter charges against the actor for the 2021 shooting death of Helena Hutchins. So what could be behind the about face? And is this the end of the case a year and a half after this tragedy? The deadly tornado outbreak in Oklahoma, a suspected EF3 tornado touching down near Oklahoma City. At least 3 people killed and homes destroyed. 15 tornadoes reported across 3 states. And tonight, nearly 40 million Americans from Wisconsin to Texas are at risk for dangerous storms. U.S. troops mobilized. Sources confirming to NBC News that U.S. troops are being moved in East Africa as the situation in Sudan deteriorates, where they're being placed to prepare for a potential evacuation of U.S. diplomats or American civilians at a moment's notice. Plus, Fox News preparing for another legal battle after reaching a $787 million settlement with Dominion Voting Systems, the media company now facing a lawsuit from Dominion's competitor, Smartmatic, over their coverage following the 2020 election. A lawyer for Smartmatic, lead counsel, joins Top Story Live. And high times in America. This 420, we're taking a look at the growing movement to legalize marijuana in the U.S. Hollywood A-lister Woody Harrelson voicing his support today on Capitol Hill. What he told our reporter. Top Story starts right now. And good evening. We begin tonight with breaking news. Sources confirming to NBC News that President Biden will launch his re-election campaign as early as next week. Those sources telling us the announcement could come as early as Tuesday, which would be the same day the president announced his 2020 run. And speaking of 2020, the matchup could look the same in 2024. Former President Trump has already announced he's running for president again and is currently the frontrunner for the GOP nomination, according to several polls. So how is the Biden administration preparing for a second term? I want to get right to Chief White House correspondent Kristen Welker, who helped break this story for NBC News. Kristen, this is the news that the political world has been speculating about for months, but we know we are very close to an announcement. Tell us what you know.
You're absolutely right, Tom. This is not a surprise. Here is what we know from 3 sources familiar with the plans who tell NBC News President Biden, as you say, is preparing to make his intention to seek a second term official next week, with advisors eyeing an announcement as soon as Tuesday. Now, Mr. Biden would launch his candidacy with a campaign video, we are told. Look, the president, Tom, as you say, has teased his re-election announcement for weeks now, even telling our Al Roker during the Easter egg roll that he's planning to run. But the reality check here is he's facing some serious headwinds, low approval ratings in most polls, and even some Democrats who've expressed concerns about the 80-year-old seeking a second term. Aides say there is one important caveat to all of this. The plans could always shift. They're not official until the announcement is out. Still, this could be teeing up an epic rematch between President Biden and his predecessor, former President Trump.
Kristen, do we know what the president's argument is going to be, what his case is going to be reelected by the American people?
I think you have heard him start to lay it out. He first did that during his State of the Union address when he said, let's finish the job. That's essentially going to be his message. And I think that you've heard tones of what we are going to hear on the campaign trail. Just yesterday, he was talking about the quote unquote MAGA agenda. So he's trying to pit himself as someone who is more moderate. And remember why he ran back in 2019. He argued that he would be the candidate to bring back calm and consistency to the White House. Tom, I think you're going to see a lot about that again. Now, look, don't expect to see him barnstorming out of the gate. He is now a sitting president, so I expect he will use that to his benefit. Expect a lot of Rose Garden events, Tom, as we head into the spring. and summer. I don't expect you're going to see a full campaign push for several months.
All right,
Tom.
Kristen Welker, part of our NBC News team that broke this monster story tonight. Kristen, we appreciate that. For more on this breaking news and what this means for the 2024 race, NBC News political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, has just called in to Top Story tonight. Chuck, thanks for joining us. First, your initial thoughts. We sort of knew this was coming, but now we're finally here. It could be as early as next week.
Well, look, it was a necessary step just logistically. I mean, I had talked with somebody close to the campaign. This was early on a couple months ago, and I was trying to get a sense of, why would couldn't President Biden wait till the end of the calendar year? And this person said to me, no, they expect to have to spend $100 million this calendar year in order to defend themselves from attacks, worry about they think they have to start responding to attack ads from Trump, responding from attack ads perhaps from DeSantis. And so they needed to start the official campaign infrastructure. And at this point, this is, again, being in line with what was done with the reelect that most of these people were involved with Obama, and what they did 4 years ago. I mean, they had to start raising money sooner rather than later.
And Chuck, 2020 was such a weird campaign because of the pandemic. The president is 80 years old right now. He'll be nearly 82 on Election Day in 2024. How tough of a campaign is this going to be for the president?
Well, we're going to find out. But it's my understanding that this is not going to be, you're not going to see it the way Barack Obama campaigned around the country. I remember his reelect announcement, where it was right around the same time. Within a week of the video announcement, he was barnstorming in Columbus, Ohio, Richmond, Virginia, and he was already doing the battleground states, and he was doing big political rallies. This is not going to be the case with him, with President Biden. I'm told you're going to see him in smaller, intimate settings. He's still going to go to these places. If he does a big rally during, and again, this is likely, I don't think you'll see him do a big rally until sometime the spring of 24, or, I'm talking April, May of next year.
Right.
I would imagine you'll see things like Bruce Springsteen with him in order to draw the crowd. Like when the rally stuff happens, it's going to be getting other people to sort of be the big crowd gatherer. You're going to see him more in the White House and in small settings.
Briefly, Chuck, how much of a percentage, and I don't need a scientific number here, but how much of his campaign do you think is going to be anti-MAGA, anti-possibly President Trump getting reelected versus new ideas, the Biden agenda?
As long as his approval rating's under 45%, which it has been, I think it's going to be 30-70. 70% about MAGA and Trump.
All right. Chuck Todd, we thank you for calling in on this breaking news. With President Biden gearing up for his campaign, I want to bring in two friends of Top Story, Alencia Johnson, a former Biden campaign senior advisor, and NBC News political analyst Carlos Curbelo. I'm going to start with you because you have the experience here. Give us your initial thoughts. What is President Biden's argument to be reelected?
Well, I think it's the argument that he's making now. He is talking about the bills that he has passed over these past 2 years, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and he's letting the American people know that the benefits that they are seeing is because of his administration. And then on top of that, we're letting the Republicans just kind of take each other out here at this moment when we can be focusing on the way in which we are going to show up for the American people and the issues that they care about, gun control, abortion rights, all of these things that we can make.
But Alencia, you also have inflation out of control. They have not been able to tame inflation, right? Very low approval numbers. We just heard that from Chuck Todd. And you also have immigration that is out of control. So what happens? I mean, what is the? I know you mentioned infrastructure, but what is the main argument? I mean, or is it an anti-Trump argument?
Well, I think it's both, right? I think there is the anti-Trump argument. I think there's the anti-MAGA Republican argument because it's bigger than Trump. It's the entire Republican Party. But again, the president is out talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. He's talking about these policies that, as we know, it takes time for the American people to see them. And he's also telling folks, listen, you showed up for me in 2022 so we could stop some of this bad stuff that is happening. If you show up for me again in 2024, we can go further.
Carlos, what do you think, right? We have a president who's 80 years old. He's shown, though, he's been able to still go out there. He just got back from an overseas trip to Ireland. But what do you think that the campaign trail is going to look like for him? Chuck sort of, described a scenario where he's not out and as active as we've seen candidates in the past. But whether he runs against a Governor Ron DeSantis or a former President Trump or maybe even a Senator Tim Scott, you're going to see candidates who are out there active trying to show energy.
Well, Tom, I think that's right. And the biggest thing that Joe Biden has going for him right now is that Donald Trump is leading in the Republican primary for president because Biden knows that he can beat Trump. Democrats trust that he can beat Trump because he has already. And if the campaign is going to be about Trump and his circus and the whole MAGA movement, then Joe Biden is going to have a very good chance of getting reelected. I think a lot of Democrats, including the Biden campaign or the future Biden campaign, were waiting to see how things developed in the Republican primary. Of course, it's early and everything can change, but for right now, it does seem like Donald Trump is in full control. And I think that gave the Biden team impetus to jump into this race because they think they can win a campaign that's about Donald Trump. If the campaign is about issues and his record versus the record of a Republican governor, for example, that could be a much harder campaign for President Biden.
Alencia, do you think the vice president, Kamala Harris, does she play a bigger role now? I mean, I think you could make an argument that the spotlight is going to be bigger on her, even though she's had a very rough go being sort of the vice president, trying to find her footing.
I do think she's going to play an even bigger role. She has been playing a big role in this administration, but particularly on some of these issues that people care about. You see her out there this week. She was talking about abortion rights. She talks about gun control. We brought up immigration. She is literally out here on these issues. And I think she's going to be obviously the top surrogate because she is the vice president. Carlos brought up, you both brought up the age piece.
Yeah.
President Biden said it's a legitimate question. He said, just watch me. I could show you better than I can tell you based on the policies that I'm able to put forward for the American people. And
but again, it is going to be a different campaign than in 2020.
It is.
You cannot campaign from your house, You
can't. We're not in COVID. Well,
right.
We're not at the beginnings of COVID, right? We have to be out there in the world. But, I think the thing that President Biden has done really well is he has empowered so many people in his administration. There are going to be tons of surrogates out there. But, again, you'll see President Biden where it matters. Like this week, he was with labor unions while the Republicans were here in New York with Wall Street.
Carlos, does the shakeup at all, now that there's been an announcement, does that shake things up on the GOP side? Because there's been a lot of just back and forth between Governor Ron DeSantis and former President Trump, and DeSantis in some ways getting savaged even before entering the campaign trail.
Yeah, it's remarkable, Tom. Just a few months ago, we were talking about how Ron DeSantis was sitting at the top of the political universe, and now he's in a deepening political rut. But with Joe Biden announcing next week, as we expect, that he's going to run for president, what this could do to Republican primary voters is put the focus on winning a general election, and that could hurt Donald Trump. You might hear candidates like Nikki Haley and others saying, we already tried to put up Donald Trump against Joe Biden and he lost, so choose me or choose someone else. You're going to start hearing some of these Republican candidates making those pragmatic arguments to the base, saying, hey, you might like Donald Trump, you might get excited by him, but I can actually win. We'll see if those arguments can loosen Trump's grip on this Republican primary right now.
Carlos Curbelo, Alencia Johnson, we thank you for this conversation, as always. A major issue President Biden will have to face are questions surrounding the criminal tax case federal prosecutors are investigating against his son, Hunter Biden. The attorney for an IRS agent involved speaking to NBC News' Hallie Jackson, saying his client is being denied whistleblower protection. Here's Hallie with those new details.
New NBC News reporting tonight on the potential criminal charges federal prosecutors have considered against the president's son. 3 tax crimes and a charge related to a gun purchase, according to 2 sources familiar with the matter. But after a years-long investigation, no charges have been brought. And now, a new allegation the president's son is getting preferential treatment. In a new letter to Congress, an IRS special agent is asking for whistleblower protection, citing his work in a high-profile case. But a source familiar with the matter, who also verified the letter's authenticity, confirms it is the Hunter Biden investigation.
He would never forgive himself if he just sat there and said nothing.
Why should people believe that your client is not motivated by political considerations in coming forward here?
In terms of credibility, he's willing to be cross-examined. He's willing to be tested. He has documents that support some of the assertions he wants to make.
The agent has allegedly seen clear conflicts of interest and preferential treatment and politics improperly infecting decisions. Last month, the Attorney General making this pledge about the case, overseen by a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in Delaware.
It's not restricted in his investigation in any way.
Two senior law enforcement officials describing to NBC News growing frustration inside the FBI because federal investigators finished the bulk of their work about a year ago and suspect political interference is delaying the process.
Apparently, it's about the Department of Justice having a bias here.
We surely are curious to see if this is being slow-walked.
No comment from the Justice Department or IRS, but the White House says the president's keeping an appropriate distance.
He believes in the rule of law. He believes in the independence of the Justice Department.
Hunter Biden shadowed by a series of Republican-led investigations, with his attorney saying it appears this IRS agent has committed a crime by sharing private tax information and had denied my client protections that are his right.
There is a means for whistleblowers to come forward and still to protect the rights of individual taxpayers. And that's what's happening here. I think any kind of attacks on him personally is unfortunate.
All right, with that, Hallie Jackson joins Top Story Live tonight. Hallie, great to have you on our show. Our colleagues have learned more about the possible charges Hunter Biden could be facing.
Yeah, I want to lay them out. I want to be careful of how we're phrasing it, Tom, because it is obviously, there's reason to be precise. NBC News has learned federal prosecutors have considered potential criminal charges against Hunter Biden, including 3 tax crimes and a charge related to a gun purchase, according to 2 sources familiar with the matter. Now, no charges have been brought here in an investigation that has been going on for years. And we should point out it is possible that no charges will be brought here. That said, you have heard in that piece some of the reporting laying out concerns that some sources in law enforcement have said to members of our team about how they see this process developing. The bottom line on this, Tom, is that this is something that everybody, a lot of people on both sides of the aisle are looking at, right? You've got Democrats looking at it for reasons of this being the president's son. You've got Republicans leading investigations into Hunter Biden, investigations that Democrats see as simply politically motivated. Here's what we know, and I can tell you from my conversation with that attorney, Mark Lytle, he says his client insists on speaking to members of both parties. If he does get this whistleblower protection, and he doesn't have it yet, he wants to be sure he's talking to both Democrats or Republicans because Lytle says his client does not want to be seen as partisan here.
All right, Hallie Jackson with a lot of new and very important reporting on that Hunter Biden story. Hallie, we appreciate having you on. The other big headline tonight, charges have been dropped against actor Alec Baldwin for the fatal shooting of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins on the set of the movie Rust. Let's walk you through what got us to this point. October 21st, you'll remember that date, 2021, the day the shooting took place. Alec Baldwin seen visibly distraught hours after 42-year-old Hutchins was shot and killed on the set in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The director also hurt. And we learned that Baldwin was holding the Colt .45 revolver when it fired a live round. Then in December, Baldwin gives his first interview since the shooting. You may remember this. The actor telling ABC's George Stephanopoulos that he didn't pull the trigger and doesn't know how a live bullet got onto the set. He also said he didn't think he would face criminal charges. Then several months later, we're talking April now, 2022, the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office releasing this video showing Baldwin rehearsing his quick draw with that Colt .45 only moments before that deadly shooting. It was used as part of their investigation. The sheriff's office also releasing body cam footage of the moments officers arrived on the scene, speaking to Baldwin in full costume about what happened. Then in October of 2022, more than a year later after the shooting, the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office handed their report to the district attorney, and 3 months after that, the biggest development of all, prosecutors announcing and then charging Baldwin and the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, with involuntary manslaughter. Baldwin pleaded not guilty in February, we know that, and then the DA stepped away from the case in March, and that brings us to today. Baldwin's lawyer says the charges have been dropped on the same day filming of the movie resumed in Montana. NBC's Miguel Almaguer has been following all of this for us, and he has a story.
You were in the room when the lady... I was the one holding the gun, yeah. 18 months after Alec Baldwin was involved in the fatal shooting of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins, tonight the bombshell announcement from his attorneys. The actor will no longer face criminal charges. We are pleased with the decision to dismiss the case against Alec Baldwin, they write, and we encourage a proper investigation into the facts and circumstances of this tragic accident. The stunning reversal appearing to clear the 65-year-old of involuntary manslaughter charges.
What's the bottom line here? Was there enough evidence here for a conviction?
I think the bottom line is that there was a rush to judgment and that there was never enough evidence against Baldwin to begin with.
With no official announcement yet from the Santa Fe District Attorney's Office, tonight NBC News has not independently confirmed what multiple outlets are reporting. The gun used by Baldwin had been modified with a new trigger, making it possible to misfire, as the actor said. The legal debacle, the latest victory for Baldwin. In February, his lawyers successfully argued the gun enhancement charge, which carried 5 years in prison, should be dropped.
Do you believe Alec Baldwin should go to prison?
It's not my call right now to believe whether he goes to prison or not.
Then in March, the special prosecutor stepped down from the case after Baldwin's team said she posed a conflict of interest.
It seemed like the prosecution just kept hitting hurdles along the way. And then the new sets of prosecutors that took over said, why have we inherited this kind of mess?
The unraveling of legal charges comes on the very same day Rust resumed production, this time at Montana's Yellowstone Film Ranch. Now alongside director Joel Souza, who was also shot. Tonight, no comment from Baldwin himself, who is back on set and apparently clear of criminal charges.
All right, Miguel Almaguer joins us live tonight from Los Angeles. Miguel, on that last point in your piece there, what do we know about this new production of Rust? We know it's the same director and Baldwin, as you mentioned, but are there different cast members, different crew members?
Yeah, Tom, many of the cast and crew members have continued with the production, but that has not necessarily been the case for all of the crew members. The film is now using union members during filming, and you'll recall that many of the members from the original crew walked off the set the day of the shooting, complaining of work and safety issues, Tom.
Yeah, Miguel, before you go, I know there are still other legal troubles for the movie, including many civil suits.
Yeah, there are multiple civil lawsuits that are still in the works, and the attorney for Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the film's armorer, says she still faces a charge of involuntary manslaughter, so that case is moving forward. Meantime, we should point out the assistant director, Dave Halls, has already reached a plea deal in this case, 6 months probation, Tom.
All right, Miguel, we thank you for all of that. For more on the late-breaking developments in the legal case against Alec Baldwin, I want to bring in attorney Angela Senadella, also known as the lawyer Angela, with more than 1 million followers on TikTok. Angela, I want to play some sound from back in October of 2021. It was right after Hutchins was killed, when the Santa Fe County DA, Mary Carmack Altwee, she came on Top Story. She said this: "How did two people inspect the gun and not know there was a live round in there?"
I think that is the question that remains to be answered and is probably the linchpin of the entire case.
So I got to ask you this as well. How important is Alec Baldwin to this investigation?
Well, obviously, he's very important. He's the one that pulled the trigger. He's the one that was holding the gun. And so he's very important. Does that mean that charges will be filed? Not necessarily. It also doesn't mean that they won't be filed.
Okay, since then, a lot has changed, right? Carmack Altwee has stepped away from prosecuting this case, and the charges have been dropped against Alec Baldwin. What do you think happened here?
Why do I think that all of a sudden these charges were dropped? Well, we saw two special prosecutors who were new come in just at the end of March. And I love that timeline you just showed, because it showed visually how long that investigation went on. Right. All the strategy and time the former special prosecutor put into this entire investigation. Now you have brand new prosecutors come in with only weeks to plan for a new trial. And so are they going to suddenly step into the old prosecutor's shoes, agree with all of their strategy, have the defense witness lists be the same, the prosecution, etc.? So much has changed.
And it's just not enough time to do this case, is what you're saying.
I think it's not enough time. I also think it's finite resources. Remember how the state had to apply for funding in order to even have lawyers to fight this case?
Well, that leads me to my second question. I mean, how much of this do you think was a high-profile celebrity who has millions of dollars to form a very, very powerful legal team going up against local prosecutors?
So that's absolutely correct. And in fact, we had Santa Fe even mention that. They called these attorneys fancy attorneys because Baldwin's lawyers have been filing motion after motion after motion, really just wearing this team down and wearing down their resources. That said, it's not like their motions have just been unbased or unfounded. They had great motions that revealed unconstitutionality of, for example, the firearm charge being brought, and when the event happened months before the actual law went into effect.
And there was also the back and forth on whether he pulled the trigger or didn't pull the trigger. Yes. I do want to ask you about the other case, though, that against Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer. Those charges charges have not been dropped. What do you think happens to that case?
Well, I think it's possible that they're connected and that perhaps the prosecutors decided, look, we have more than enough evidence here to go after Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. Rather than bifurcate and dilute our resources, we're going to put all our eggs in this basket. We have not heard a lot from Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's lawyers. They haven't been filing motion after motion. Also, her role in this case seems to be somewhat more direct. People think that she was maybe responsible. And prosecutors are not immune to social media, what's going on in the news. There are so many people saying that Baldwin should not have been charged as an actor. And so often that does come into play.
What did you think of this case? I mean, was there enough to charge him with involuntary manslaughter with what you had seen in the case?
Well, it seemed clear that there was some recklessness involved. Was it Baldwin? Was it Gutierrez-Reed? Was it all of them? I was waiting to see what Halls would say, because Dave Halls got a plea deal with the understanding that he would testify against both parties. We need to see who those people who were there at the time, what they have to say about what happened. And I've been waiting to hear that.
Yeah, and we're going to have to wait and see what happens with this. Angela, great to have you on. We always do appreciate that. We're also following that deadly tornado outbreak. 15 tornadoes reported across 3 states, 8 of those in hard-hit Oklahoma, where an EF3 twister killed at least 3 people and caused widespread damage. Search and rescue operations are underway, with authorities warning that death toll could rise. Katie Beck reports.
Tonight, residents of Cole, Oklahoma are picking up the pieces, sifting through piles of rubble where their homes once stood. After danger swept into town late Wednesday. There's a tornado. The dark funnel cloud captured on video, rain, hail, and lightning striking around it. The National Weather Service preliminarily confirming an EF3 tornado, claiming the lives of 3 people.
She was the only one here.
19-year-old Joseph Davis says his grandmother, who he lived with here, was one of them. He was at work when the storm took hold.
Most of my stuff is completely destroyed. There was another house right there, as you can see. It's been completely destroyed.
The powerful winds overturning trucks, leaving businesses in mounds of rubble, and thousands of residents without power.
The whole house shook, and the windows and everything, and of course the kids were scared.
In nearby Shawnee, a school gymnasium now unrecognizable. And in Kansas, a semi-truck sent sideways off of I-70.
That's my granddaughter's bed right there, up in the trees. Everything is gone.
Back in Cole, Anthony Moomey is thankful to be alive. He and 4 family members were inside when his house was tossed into the air. The walls collapsed around them.
Stuff's flying everywhere, and I'm just hoping something don't, because I'm on the outside and they're all underneath stuff.
All 5 escaped with bumps and bruises. Moomey lost his home and his business, but not his hope. He says he's standing on it.
It gets worse. But we're alive. That's the main thing. We can rebuild. Lives is not something you can replace.
While cleanup and recovery efforts are just getting underway here in Cole, Oklahoma, millions more are now bracing for what could be another round of threatening storms. Tom?
Katie Beck with what's been such a violent year for tornadoes across the country. And for more on the ongoing threat, I want to bring in NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns, who joins me now, and right behind him, another active radar.
Yeah, and I think those strong tornadoes scare everyone for a reason. I mean, when you see how they just obliterated a house, it's hard to survive. And that's why we've had so many fatalities this spring so far with so many strong tornadoes. So we're hoping to avoid that tonight. We have a line of thunderstorms that could produce isolated tornadoes. Right now, it's heading from Milwaukee southward. Chicago's being spared, but we have had some strong storms north. No tornado warnings there. We're also going to deal with some very large hail. This is San Antonio, and look at the size of this thunderstorm. Look at all the lightning strike. There's like hundreds of them. All these little white dots as cloud-to-ground lightning strikes here, so I can imagine how loud that is. But this probably contains tennis ball-sized hail, too, and that could drift to the north side of San Antonio. So in all, it's about a 1,200-mile-long stretch from Texas all the way to Wisconsin here that has isolated chances of severe weather, maybe a chance of an isolated tornado, too. But large hail is definitely the biggest threat, and this continues till at least 8, 9, 10 o'clock Central Time. Some of these warnings and watches will be extended through the overnight hours, especially down here around Houston to Shreveport. That area has yet to be hit. It looks like timing about midnight to 2 a.m. for you. In this area from Waco to Austin and San Antonio, this is the best chance of what we call tennis ball-sized hail. That's enough to smash a windshield. We get a little bit of a break tomorrow, just a little bit in Mississippi, and then, Tom, Saturday, we'll have to watch out for southeast coastal sections for more severe storms.
All right, Bill, thank you for that. All right, we want to turn now overseas to some breaking news we've been following all week here on Top Story, the ongoing conflict in Sudan. Tonight, the U.S. is deploying additional troops to East Africa in case they are needed to evacuate U.S. civilians or officials from Sudan, including at the embassy. It's a sign of just how dangerous things have become in Africa's third largest country. This despite a brief ceasefire declared on Wednesday. I want to bring in now NBC News national security correspondent Courtney Kube, who joins us now from the Pentagon with some new reporting. So, Courtney, walk us through this, and I want to know what you're hearing from your sources about the contingency plans here, right? The Americans will be deployed to a base in Djibouti, from what we know, more than 1,000 miles from Sudan's capital of Khartoum. How would an evacuation work? Because it is pretty far.
It's far and it's extremely dangerous. So there's sort of two options that will most likely be put into play if this evacuation is called for. And we have to point out that at this point, State Department has not requested an evacuation. If the situation continues to be as contested or dangerous in Khartoum as we have seen over the last several days, then most likely U.S. Special Operations troops would be called in to try to evacuate either those 70 or so U.S. personnel assigned to the embassy there, or even potentially a larger American citizen evacuation, upwards of 16,000 Americans or dual citizens who may be in the area. That's one option. If, in fact, you mentioned a ceasefire, it's not really holding. If a ceasefire does hold and it becomes slightly safer for the U.S. military to go in, the Marine Corps has these constructs. It's sort of an aviation combat unit. They're a quick reaction force that are trained to do exactly this thing, go into areas and take Americans out. It was actually a construct that began after the attack on the consulate in Benghazi more than a decade ago. At the time, they called them a Marine Air Ground Task Force. They've changed it a little bit, but it's still upwards of about 1,000 Marines. They have aviation assets assigned to them. They are a quick reaction. They are very nimble, and they're trained to do this. But if they are in a contested environment, more likely we'd see the Special Operations troops. Again, I have to say, no evacuation has been called for, but the military is putting in the troops and the equipment that they would need for either of those contingencies, Tom.
All right, Courtney Kube, we thank you for that. Back here in the U.S., Fox News preparing for more legal battles relating to the 2020 election following its $787.5 million settlement with Dominion Voting Systems. The media company facing a $2.7 billion defamation lawsuit filed by Dominion's competitor, Smartmatic. The voting technology company is seeking damages from Fox and 5 individuals. You see them here: Fox host Maria Bartiromo, Lou Dobbs, Jeanine Pirro, and Trump lawyers Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, alleging that the defendants knowingly spread false claims about the company. Tonight, we are joined by the lead attorney on the Smartmatic's case, Eric Connolly. Eric, thank you for joining Top Stories tonight. I know you haven't made a lot of public comments, so we appreciate your time. I want to ask you more about your lawsuit in a minute, but first, I need to ask you, when you heard the news this week that Fox News was settling for $787.5 million, what did you think, and what did you tell your client?
So, Tom, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate that. I will tell you, I was not surprised by the settlement. I was not surprised by the amount of the settlement. I know it's a big number, but you have to put that in the context here. This was one of the largest disinformation campaigns we've ever seen. And the damage that was done by Fox is on a level that we almost never will see again. So a case like this, where the damage is so significant and the reach of that damage is so broad, you have to expect that a settlement's going to be in that type of category.
Eric, I want to go to the statement you put out after that settlement was announced. Let's put it up on the screen. You wrote, Dominion's litigation exposed some of the misconduct and damage caused by Fox's disinformation campaign. Smartmatic will expose the rest. Dominion had a lot of evidence, right? They had the text messages, they had the emails. Are you saying you have even more damaging evidence?
I think that is a two-part answer, Tom. I think, first, the damning evidence that you saw Dominion put out there, that damning evidence is just as applicable to Smartmatic. If you remember, the nature of the disinformation here was Dominion and Smartmatic rigged this election. So all that great evidence that's already out there in the public domain that Dominion put in their papers is consistent with everybody at Fox knew this election wasn't rigged. Everybody knew that the voting machines weren't involved in it. So they certainly knew Dominion and Smartmatic had absolutely nothing to do with this conspiracy that they were putting on the air night after night. But the second part, for my client at least, is we will expose the gross recklessness of Fox here. You have to remember, my client in 2020, we were in LA County. in LA County only. We weren't anywhere else. And yet you have facts publishing night after night that we were switching votes and rigging elections in states where we weren't even there. Now, that's a level of recklessness that you almost will never see, because the ability to figure out that we weren't even there takes 1 minute on Google. So yes, we're going to have the parade of internal emails. Yes, we're going to have the parade of text messages that we're all familiar with already. But I have a degree of recklessness here that I don't think I've ever seen before, Tom.
Eric, but do you have more emails, more text messages? Do you have new information that the public has not seen?
I cannot tell you that. You'll have to wait for us to be able to put that into public filings when it's appropriate.
Can I ask?
It's not appropriate yet because the information is confidential.
Can I ask if you and your team are still digging for those types of emails, those types of text messages, just because we have heard from Fox News producers who spoke exclusively to NBC News about information they may still have?
Yep, there's still more to come. We are still digging.
Eric, I mentioned that you have a case against Fox News, but it's interesting here. Your case was actually filed in the Supreme Court before Dominion, if I'm correct. Why is it taking so long?
Yep. So the cases are proceeding at different paces because of the different courts that you're in. Dominion filed their lawsuit in the Delaware court. The Delaware court was moving those cases along at the pace that the Delaware court felt was appropriate. We filed in New York, and the New York court is moving our case along at the pace that the New York courts consider to be appropriate. So for us, we know the Fox case is moving along at the schedule that it is. Our other cases are moving along at a faster pace. So next year, in April, we have our trial against Mr. Lindell and MyPillow. Next summer, after that, we've got our lawsuit against Newsmax. We hope to have the OAN trial at the end of 24, and then the Fox case probably will be at the tail end of that. So the speed that they get to trial is just a factor of the court that you're in at the time.
Eric, I mentioned your case, and you just said it there. It's not only against Fox News, it's against the people that were saying the things you were alleging defame Smartmatic. I want to take a quick listen to some of those claims.
We now have reams and reams of actual documents from Smartmatic and Dominion, including evidence that they planned and executed all of this.
They were being notified by Smartmatic in Frankfurt that Biden was way behind and they better come up with a lot more ballots, and we can prove every single thing I just said.
Eric, when you hear that, what's your first thought that pops in your head?
There are no reams and reams of documents. There's nothing that they can prove. You know, we've been at this for a while. We've collected a lot of documents already, and there's not a single one that supports anything that you just heard played. And frankly, listen, there's not a single shred of evidence out there to support anything that any of these defendants were saying about my client, Smartmatic. It was all a made-up lie, and they knew it was a made-up lie. So it is always amusing to me to hear the kraken of evidence that's going to come out to support these outlandish claims, because there is no kraken here. There's not even one piece of evidence.
Eric, if your case makes it to trial, if Fox News decides not to settle with you, and I should point out you're asking for a significant amount of more money than Dominion was even asking for in the beginning, will you put people like Rupert Murdoch, the CEO, will you put people like Tucker Carlson, a host, other anchors on the stand and question them?
Absolutely. You basically gave my witness list away right there. So Rupert Murdoch, Lachlan Murdoch, they are front and center to this. They absolutely will be called to the stand in our case, as will the hosts that are at issue, as will Mr. Carlson, Mr. Hannity. These are key witnesses into this case, and so they would be front and center in what we would hope to put on.
And Eric, I know you're probably not going to answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have a number in mind that you would settle for? You know what Fox just settled Dominion for. Will you settle for that number or anything less?
I think the way I would answer that is my client looks at that and will say that that is a good start for where the settlement numbers go, and they need to go up from there. There's a big difference between Dominion and Smartmatic. Dominion's a great company. They're focused in North America. Smartmatic is a global company. Smartmatic is the only company that actually operates globally in this industry. And so when you're talking about the damages that the companies are experiencing, my client suffered global reputational harm 5 continents they've done business on, and they've suffered reputational harm in all 5 of those. So you're going to need to see a very significant number to come even close to making my client whole because of that.
Eric Connolly, the lead counsel for Smartmatic, we appreciate your time tonight here on Top Story. Still ahead tonight, an update on those racist recordings we told you about earlier this week. A small newspaper in Oklahoma releasing 3 hours of audio that appears to capture county officials using more racist and even more violent language. At least one now stepping down. The growing outrage and the new tapes tonight. Plus the dangerous scene in New York City, a driver crashing into a restaurant and driving on the sidewalk, even hitting an officer. The search for that suspect tonight. And the end of BuzzFeed News, why the company is ending their award-winning news division. Stay with us. Okay, we're back with the story we first brought you earlier this week. Disturbing audio recordings allegedly made by an Oklahoma sheriff and 3 county officials. A newspaper releasing portions of those recordings with racist and violent conversations. Tonight, the entire recordings made public with more threats. NBC's Stephen Romo has more.
Tonight, a small-town, family-run newspaper at the center of a firestorm. Protesters lining up in McCurtain County, Oklahoma, demanding the resignation of the sheriff and 2 other officials after audio excerpts of racist and violent remarks they allegedly made went public. Now, the McCurtain Gazette-News releasing what it says is the entire recording. NBC News has not independently verified its authenticity. At one point, the people on the tape appear to discuss ramming a tank into the paper's office.
What you need to do, I'm going to go with Cody. My buy one of the more wore-out tanks. It's got a bad, let's see, it have a bad steering clutch on the left. And we're going to go about 30 miles through town, and when it go right through that stop sign, it's making a detour right through GI and right through the...
You'll have to beat my son to it, because he's already got a bright idea. He's going to put riprap in the front door.
District Commissioner Mark Jennings, also allegedly heard on that tape, resigned after the first audio clips were released. But the others, Sheriff Kevin Clarity, Sheriff's Office investigator Alicia Manning, and jail administrator Larry Hendricks, not stepping down. The newspaper's editor, Bruce Willingham, says he secretly recorded them during a conversation on March 6th by leaving a recording device in commissioners' chambers after a public meeting. Willingham runs the paper with his son.
They initially started out talking about various people that might beat us or wanted to beat us.
The newspaper had run a series of stories critical of county officials.
I don't think I can contain myself.
Oh, you're talking about you can't control yourself.
Yeah, I'm not worried about what he's going to do to me. I'm worried about what I might do to him. They bring
those sayings, goes around, It will. I told you it will. Yeah. I know where 2 big deep holes are here every day. I got an excavator. These are like pre-dug.
None of the 4 officials allegedly involved have responded to NBC News' requests for comment, but the sheriff's office did post on Facebook calling the recording illegally obtained and saying the clips released had been altered, something attorneys for the paper deny. When the first excerpts were released, the community igniting in anger over the offensive and racist comments.
It was back in the day when take a damn blackjack, whoop their ass and throw them in the cell, I'd run for sheriff. Yeah, well, it's not like that no more. I know. Take them down here on Mud Creek and hang them up with the damn rope. Yeah. But you can't do that. The thing about it is, they got more rights than we got.
Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt now calling for the sheriff and council members to be removed. The mayor of Idabel, the county seat, echoing those calls.
You heard a story where they're talking about killing the newspaper man and how hanging folks and putting them in the creek and folks of color. This is not the 1920. This is the 2020.
All right, Stephen Romo joins us on set. Stephen, you hear a lot of disgusting things on those recordings, but you were telling me there's even grosser things they're talking about?
Yeah, this is 3 hours and 37 minutes, and some of it is quite rambling. There was a woman who died in an arson fire. They referred to that as a barbecue.
As a barbecue?
A barbecue, yeah. It's disturbing to hear that. And then also they talk about trying to fight the district attorney in this area. So it goes sort of all over the place. It's definitely what it sounds like. Confronting him in his office and fighting him is what the discussion is on that tape. Just a small part of what is in this released by the newspaper today.
Yeah. Okay, Stephen Romo, we thank you. When we come back, the explosion in the sky. Did you see this? SpaceX launching its Starship rocket for the first time, but it fell short of reaching space, bursting apart 4 minutes after launch. Why SpaceX is calling it a success. We'll explain. Back down with Top Stories newsfeed, and the driver caught on camera going on a rampage through Midtown Manhattan. New video shows the driver smashing through an outdoor restaurant. After police say they tried to pull him over and he took off, the driver then backing into one officer, knocking him to the ground. That officer is expected to be okay. Police, get this, they're still searching for that suspect. Elon Musk's SpaceX launched its Starship rocket for the first time, but it ended in a fireball. The unmanned rocket launching from South Padre Island, Texas today when it exploded midair 4 minutes after launch. SpaceX had repeatedly said getting the rocket off a launch pad would be considered a success. And BuzzFeed News is shutting down after more than a decade. BuzzFeed Incorporated announcing it is closing the news organization as it cuts 15% of its total workforce. The outlet was founded back in 2012 and even won a Pulitzer Prize. It also got a lot of criticism at times. BuzzFeed will still own HuffPost, which will be its only news brand. Coming up, New York City Mayor Adams taking aim at President Biden. This is another very big story. Why the Democratic mayor is blaming President Biden for an immigration crisis in the Big Apple that he says is going to cost the city more than $1 billion. What Adams is now asking from the White House. We're back with the growing tensions over immigration still running high. New York City Mayor Eric Adams pointing the finger at President Biden, saying the migrant crisis is creating an economic toll on the Big Apple. Rahema Ellis has more on what the Democratic mayor is asking of the president.
The national government has turned its back on New York City.
The New York City Mayor Eric Adams openly reprimanding President Biden, a rare move from a fellow Democrat on the national stage.
Every service in the city is going to be impacted by the asylum seeker crisis.
The mayor saying it's taking an economic toll on the city, having already spent $817 million on housing and services for asylum seekers as of the end of March. And he expects that number to balloon to $1.4 billion by the end of the fiscal year.
He's really walking a tightrope here. He's trying to be pro-immigrant, saying this is helpful for the economy, helpful for the city, trying to slow migration into New York City.
Adams urging the Biden administration for emergency paths, with 200 migrants arriving daily, according to the city's estimates. Adams fears that when Title 42, the Trump-era policy limiting immigration due to COVID, ends next month, the number of immigrants will only accelerate, putting too much strain on the city's budget.
This is in the lap of the President of the United States. The President of the United States can give us the ability to allow people to work.
At the heart of the matter is the number of migrants who rely on New York City services since they cannot legally work. Mayor Adams presented 3 ways the federal government could grant work authorizations to migrants: expanding eligibility criteria for temporary protected status, provide humanitarian parole for asylum seekers at the border and in the United States, and add more U.S. citizenship and immigration officers to help with pending applications. The White House telling our affiliate WNBC FEMA is providing assistance with the migrant crisis in the city, adding it will be announcing additional funding in the coming weeks.
He is saying that this is on the doorstep of the president, and that Biden, with the stroke of a pen, could help New York City, could help asylum seekers by giving them work authorization.
It's a rhetoric shift from the mayor, who once pointed the finger at Republican governors for sending migrants to the city, and is now targeting the Biden administration directly. For the past year, he's been asking for federal resources. But now, Mayor Adams says it's a situation that the city can no longer bear.
We have shouldered this course far too long. This is decimating the foundation of our city. It will undermine our city.
All right, Rahema Ellis joins us now live in studio. Rahema, I mean, you have a new Democratic mayor and you have a president who's just announcing that he's going to run for re-election next week. And now you have the mayor going after him. This has to be such a serious problem.
It is really serious because, as you know,
Mayor Adams has called himself the Biden of Brooklyn.
Right.
He is a staunch supporter of the president. I didn't ask the mayor the question himself of why he's doing this, but we talked to experts who say they think that the mayor has twofold purpose in doing this.
Right.
One, he wants to get Washington's attention.
Yeah.
He wants the White House to understand that this is really serious. The other, he wants to get the attention of the progressives on the city council who think he's being tight-fisted with the money. He's saying, no, that's not the case. We are really in a crisis situation. And when Title 42 is lifted, expect to be listed at the end of next month, a crisis situation is going to become even more dire. He's trying to focus attention on this.
Now, I guarantee this story is probably going to gain a lot more steam. Okay, Rahima, we appreciate it. Always love having you on the show. Thank you. Coming up, it is 420 in D.C. today. It was a joint celebration and work day for marijuana advocates. And we caught up with one of the most famous ones, Woody Harrelson. What he told our reporter about the effort across the country. Stay with us. Finally tonight, a blunt reality in Washington, D.C. While a majority of Americans believe marijuana should be legalized, there's no federal legislation to support it. On marijuana's unofficial holiday today, 420, bipartisan lawmakers heard from cannabis activists about an effort to change all of that. NBC Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin has more from Capitol Hill and even spoke to one A-list activist, actor Woody Harrelson, urging Congress to act.
Hanging out, having a good time.
Tonight, it's not just lighting up on marijuana's unofficial holiday known as 420.
Spending 420 changing laws.
In the nation's capital, work is getting done as bipartisan lawmakers come together trying to propel pot legalization forward.
If you told me that I would be speaking in this room on this topic, I would have told you that that's just not going to happen.
3, 2, 1. Just over 10 years since Washington and Colorado first legalized recreational weed in 2012, now access to cannabis in 21 states and Washington, D.C. is fully legal. And in another 19 states, people can consume marijuana for medicinal purposes. Yet even where it's legal, those states are still facing big challenges from the federal government.
When Congress is not acting on what 70% of Americans want, there's something wrong.
Marijuana is classified as a Schedule I drug. The DEA is still putting the plant in the same category as heroin and LSD. It's creating headaches for small dispensary owners who can't operate like other businesses. Most banks won't work with them, and they lack traditional tax exemptions.
Thank you very much.
Today on Capitol Hill, some progress on bills that would give legal marijuana businesses access to banking services. We caught up with one of the most recognizable faces in marijuana advocacy, rubbing elbows with lawmakers here today. Actor Woody Harrelson.
No one has ever died from consumption of cannabis. I've tried. You can't overdose.
Harrelson co-owns a California dispensary and is blunt about the realities of the legal pot industry.
Well, we're getting taxed like crazy. Banking is not allowed to touch it, this industry.
He's also working to end the stigma.
Even if people don't want to smoke it, they don't necessarily want to see you go to jail.
But even as the movement advances, there have been setbacks. California, the largest weed market in the world, saw revenue drop for the first time last year, with some pointing out it's cheaper to buy black market weed that isn't taxed. And on the opposite coast, a different concern.
Only 2 stores have legit licenses for marijuana.
As unlicensed pot shops pop up block after block in New York, former Mayor Michael Bloomberg writing a scathing op-ed, arguing that lax enforcement is endangering the city's children. Still, we've come a long way from the war on drugs.
America's public enemy #1 in the United States is drug abuse.
A new tune from some in the Republican Party.
We're behind the times here in Congress, and way behind the times.
Free at last! It'll probably be a while before we see this in the halls of Congress, but we are closer to a joint effort.
You got both sides of the aisle here. Me, I'm an anarchist. You know, I'm or purple. I don't know what, but I'm just happy to be here with these two who really care about this subject.
We thank Julie Sirkin for that, and we thank Woody Harrelson for being Woody Harrelson. Thanks so much for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.